When Miss Jordan, a dedicated black teacher, faces relentless discrimination from Principal Thompson, her innovative teaching methods come under attack. Thompson, intent on upholding outdated educational standards, publicly humiliates her in front of parents, unaware of their true identities. As tensions rise, a group of supportive parents, linked to the school board, rally to defend her. In a high-stakes showdown at the next board meeting, Miss Jordan must confront not only her principal's biases, but also the systemic injustices in education. Will she overcome the prejudice and inspire real change, or will Thompson's oppressive tactics silence her voice forever? Before we dive into this incredible story, comment below where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy the story. Now let's get started. The conference room buzzed with the chatter of parents, teachers, and staff members, creating an atmosphere of anticipation. Miss Jordan, a dedicated fifth-grade teacher, sat at the long table, trying to suppress the knot tightening in her stomach. Tonight's parent-teacher meeting promised to be important, and she felt the weight of Principal Thompson's scrutiny looming over her like a storm cloud. Principal Thompson, a tall man with an imposing presence, strode to the front of the room, exuding confidence. "Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for being here tonight to discuss our school's progress," he began, his voice booming. "As you all know, our goal is excellence, and that requires dedication from both our staff and students." Ms. Jordan shifted in her seat, a mix of excitement and apprehension swirling inside her. She had poured her heart into her classroom, fostering creativity and critical thinking, but Thompson's rigid focus on standardized test scores often overshadowed her efforts. "And now," he continued, "I want to address some of our challenges. I have received reports regarding some teachers who may not be fully meeting the standards we expect at our school." Her heart raced as he turned to her, a smirk creeping onto his face. "For instance, Mrs. Jordan's class has been struggling," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "While I admire her enthusiasm, we cannot ignore the fact that her students' test scores have not improved as we would hope. We need to consider the impact this has on our school's reputation." Gasps rippled through the room. Parents exchanged glances, surprise and confusion etched on their faces. Miss Jordan clenched her fists, refusing to let his words intimidate her. She had always believed that education was about more than just numbers, and she wouldn't allow him to undermine her in front of the very parents who trusted her. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson," Miss Jordan interjected, her voice steady, "education is about more than test scores. My students are not just numbers, they are individuals with unique talents and abilities. I strive to create a classroom environment where they feel valued, and I believe that is reflected in their growth." The murmurs among the parents grew louder, a mix of support for Miss Jordan and discontent with Principal Thompson's approach, but he was not one to back down easily. "While I appreciate your passion, Mrs. Jordan, we have to prioritize results," he replied, his tone cutting. "If our students are not performing well on standardized assessments, we have to question whether we're providing the right education." Miss Jordan's heart sank. This was not just about her. It was about her students' futures. Taking a deep breath, she pressed on. "But those scores do not tell the full story of what is happening in the classroom. My students are learning critical thinking and collaboration skills, qualities that will serve them well beyond the classroom walls." Before Thompson could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson?" It was Mr. Harris, a distinguished man in a sharp suit who had been quietly observing the exchange. His presence commanded attention, and the room fell silent. "I think we need to take a step back here," Mr. Harris said, his tone calm but assertive. "I have a daughter in Mrs. Jordan's class, and I can say that she is thriving under her guidance. My daughter has become more confident, more engaged, and more passionate about learning because of the environment Mrs. Jordan has created." Principal Thompson looked taken aback, and Miss Jordan felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps not everyone was aligned with his views. "And while test scores are important," Mr. Harris added, "we have to recognize that education is about developing well-rounded individuals. Mrs. Jordan is doing just that." Thompson's expression darkened, but he quickly regained composure. "I appreciate your input, Mr. Harris, but we must remain focused on the larger picture. Our school's performance is crucial to our reputation. I would argue that Mrs. Jordan's performance is a significant part of that picture, Mr. Harris countered. We can't allow ourselves to overlook the positive impact she's making on her students. As the room buzzed with murmurs of agreement, Miss Jordan felt gratitude wash over her. This wasn't just about defending her methods, it was about standing up for what she believed in. But would it be enough to change Thompson's mind? The meeting began to wind down, but the tension lingered. Parents approached Miss Jordan, voicing their support and sharing stories of how their children had changed since being in her class. Mrs. Harris stood beside Miss Jordan, a warm smile on her face. "Thank you for all that you do for our daughter and her classmates," she said. "You're making a real difference." As the last few parents filed out, Miss Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a battle for her career, it was a battle for her students, and she wouldn't back down. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions for Miss Jordan. She had experienced a wave of support from parents after the meeting, and she felt buoyed by their encouragement. However, the shadow of Principal Thompson loomed larger than ever. He was determined to maintain his authority, and his disdain for her teaching methods grew more evident. Miss Jordan poured herself into her work, planning engaging lessons that incorporated art, music, and hands-on activities. She wanted her students to feel excited about learning, but every time she turned around, it seemed Thompson was lurking nearby, ready to critique her every move. One afternoon, after school, Miss Jordan was organizing her classroom when she overheard Principal Thompson speaking with a couple of board members outside her door. Their voices were muffled, but the tension was palpable. "I don't care how much they like her," Thompson's voice echoed, low and dangerous. "We can't afford to let sentiment cloud our judgment. If her scores don't improve by the next evaluation, we'll have to take action." Miss Jordan's heart raced as she strained to listen, horrified by his words. Did he truly believe her students' worth was measured solely by their test scores? As she pondered her next steps, the door swung open, and in walked Mr. Harris and a few other supportive parents. "Mrs. Jordan," Mr. Harris said, his expression serious, "we need to talk." The group gathered around her desk, and Miss Jordan could see the concern etched on their faces. "We know that Thompson is putting pressure on you," Mr. Harris continued, "and we want to help." "You've inspired our children in ways we didn't think possible," another parent chimed in. "It's not just about the scores, it's about their growth." Miss Jordan felt a swell of emotion. "I appreciate your support, but I'm afraid that Thompson won't listen to us. He's set in his ways. Maybe we need to take a more direct approach," Mr. Harris suggested. "What if we organize a meeting with the school board? We can present our concerns and your successes." The idea sparked a flicker of hope within Miss Jordan. "That could work," she said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "But we need to be strategic. Thompson won't back down easily." "Then we'll prepare our case," Mr. Harris declared. "We'll highlight the positive changes we've seen in our children since they've been in your class. This isn't just about defending you, it's about defending what's best for our kids." The parents rallied around Miss Jordan, brainstorming ways to gather testimonials from students and other parents. They discussed forming a coalition to advocate for a more holistic approach to education, one that recognized creativity, critical thinking, and emotional growth alongside academic achievement. As the weeks passed, Miss Jordan felt a sense of determination building within her. She was no longer fighting alone. With the support of Mr. Harris and the other parents, she began to feel that maybe they could challenge Principal Thompson's oppressive regime. But the clock was ticking. The upcoming board meeting loomed, and Thompson would surely be prepared to defend his position. Miss Jordan knew they had to present a united front. One evening, as Miss Jordan worked late in her classroom, she heard a knock on the door. It was Mr. Harris, looking more serious than ever. "Miss Jordan, I have some news," he said, closing the door behind him. "I just spoke with the superintendent. He's going to attend the meeting next week." Miss Jordan's heart raced. "The superintendent? Is that good or bad?" "It's good," Mr. Harris assured her. "He's been looking into the school's performance and has concerns about how teachers are being treated. If we can present our case effectively, it might just tip the scales in our favor." Ms. Jordan felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you for pushing this forward, Mr. Harris. I can't tell you how much this means to me." "Let's make sure we have everything ready," he replied, determination etched on his face. "We're going to make our voices heard." The day of the school board meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Parents filed into the room, their faces filled with a mix of apprehension and determination. Miss Jordan stood at the front, her heart pounding as she adjusted her notes. The room buzzed with conversations, and she felt a wave of support wash over her from the parents gathered in solidarity. Mr. Harris took his place beside her, offering an encouraging nod. "We've got this," he whispered, and Miss Jordan felt her resolve strengthen. Principal Thompson entered the room, his demeanor exuding confidence. He surveyed the crowd with a smug expression, as if he already knew he was in control. Ms. Jordan clenched her fists, reminding herself of the stakes. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but Ms. Jordan could sense the tension building. When the time came for public comment, Mr. Harris stepped forward. "Thank you for allowing us to speak," he began, his voice steady but passionate. "We are here today to advocate for a more inclusive and supportive educational environment for our children, one that values creativity and emotional growth just as much as academic performance." He paused, scanning the room for support. "We want to highlight the work of Miss Jordan, a teacher who has made a significant impact on our children's lives. Her classroom fosters not only knowledge, but also confidence, collaboration, and a love for learning." Miss Jordan's heart swelled with pride as parents began to share their stories. One after another, they spoke about their children's transformations since joining her class. The room filled with applause, the energy shifting in Miss Jordan's favor. But Principal Thompson was ready. He stood up, arms crossed, a scowl on his face. "While I understand the parents' sentiments, we must remain focused on the facts. Test scores are the benchmark of success in education. Miss Jordan's class has not performed adequately, and we must prioritize results for the good of the school." The room erupted in protests, voices rising in opposition. Miss Jordan felt a surge of adrenaline. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, education cannot be reduced to mere test scores," she argued. "It is about nurturing well-rounded individuals who can think critically and work collaboratively. My students may not excel on standardized tests, but they are learning skills that will serve them for a lifetime." The tension in the room was palpable. The board members exchanged glances, uncertain about which way to lean. The superintendent, who had remained quiet thus far, leaned forward. "It seems clear that there is a strong divide here," he said, addressing the board. "We need to consider the broader implications of our teaching methods and the message we send to our educators." Miss Jordan seized the moment, her heart racing. "I love my students. Every day, I strive to create an environment where they feel safe to explore and express themselves. This is what education should be about." Principal Thompson glared at her, his frustration evident. "This isn't just about feelings, Miss Jordan. We have standards to uphold. But what about the standards of compassion and understanding?" Miss Jordan countered, her voice steady. "We cannot expect children to perform if they do not feel valued as individuals." Just then, Mr. Harris stepped forward again, a fire in his eyes. "We are asking for the board to reconsider its approach to education. It is time to embrace a more holistic view, one that recognizes the importance of emotional and social development alongside academics." As the discussion continued, Miss Jordan's heart raced. The board members appeared torn, and she could feel the tension in the room hanging thickly in the air. She exchanged glances with Mr. Harris and the other parents, who nodded in solidarity. After what felt like hours of back and forth, the board chairwoman finally called for a vote. "We will reconvene to discuss this matter further. We appreciate everyone's input." The meeting adjourned, leaving Miss Jordan standing in the middle of the room, her mind racing. They had made a powerful case, but uncertainty lingered. Would the board support a shift in their approach to education? Would Principal Thompson relent, or would he continue his campaign against her? As the parents gathered around her, offering words of encouragement, Miss Jordan felt a flicker of hope mixed with anxiety. The battle was far from over, and she was prepared to fight for her students, her principals, and her career. Weeks passed after the board meeting, and the atmosphere at the school remained tense. Miss Jordan felt the weight of uncertainty hanging over her like a cloud. Each day, she walked into her classroom, determined to create a safe space for her students, but she could sense the ripple effects of the recent conflict. Principal Thompson continued to undermine her efforts, making snide remarks during staff meetings and issuing vague threats about her job performance. Miss Jordan's resolve was tested, but she refused to be intimidated. With every lesson she crafted, she reminded herself of the importance of her mission. One afternoon, as Miss Jordan was cleaning up her classroom after school, she received an unexpected visit from the superintendent, Mr. Walker. He stood in the doorway, a look of concern etched on his face. "Miss Jordan, can we talk?" "Of course," she replied, her heart racing. She led him to her desk, where they sat across from each other, the tension palpable. "I wanted to follow up after the last board meeting," he began, his tone serious. "There's been significant discussion about the direction of our educational approach, and your testimony has sparked a lot of conversation among the board members." Her heart leaped at the possibility that change might be on the horizon. "Really? That's encouraging to hear," she said, leaning forward, eager for more. "Yes, but it also means we need to navigate some difficult waters," he continued. "Principal Thompson is pushing hard for traditional metrics, and he's not taking your advocacy lightly. He's lobbying for a review of all teachers' performances, especially those who advocate for unconventional methods." Miss Jordan's stomach sank. "He's trying to undermine me," she realized, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I can't believe he's using this as a weapon against me." Mr. Walker nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I understand how challenging this is for you, but your voice has resonated with many, and there are parents and teachers who support your vision. We need to ensure that your approach is not lost in the shuffle." "I just want to do what's best for my students," Miss Jordan replied, frustration creeping into her voice. "They deserve an education that acknowledges their individuality. If I'm let go because of Principal Thompson's biases, then what does that say about the values of this school?" "We're working on a way to showcase your teaching methods in a positive light," Mr. Walker said, his gaze steady. "The next board meeting is in 2 weeks, and we want to gather evidence of the effectiveness of your approach. We believe that highlighting your students' growth, both academically and emotionally, can turn the tide." Ms. Jordan felt a flicker of hope. "What can I do to help?" "We'll need you to document your lessons and gather testimonials from parents and students," he suggested. "We'll also invite parents to share their experiences at the meeting. If we present a united front, it could change the narrative." Determined, Miss Jordan set to work immediately. Over the next few weeks, she meticulously documented her lessons, gathering feedback from her students. The parents were eager to help, sharing their stories about how Miss Jordan's teaching style had transformed their children's lives. They found confidence they had never shown before, and many parents described how their children had developed a newfound passion for learning. As the board meeting approached, excitement mingled with anxiety. Miss Jordan felt the weight of the responsibility resting on her shoulders, but she knew she was not alone. Parents rallied together, crafting a powerful narrative that would present a strong case for her teaching methods. The day of the meeting arrived, and the energy in the room was electric. Miss Jordan stood at the front alongside Mr. Walker, flanked by supportive parents. Principal Thompson sat at the head of the table, his face tight with frustration. The meeting unfolded much like the last, but this time the atmosphere felt different. Mr. Walker opened the floor to the parents, who shared heartfelt testimonials about Miss Jordan's impact on their children's lives. Each story resonated with the board members, their faces softening as they listened to accounts of personal growth, resilience, and newfound passion for learning. Miss Jordan watched as Principal Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He realized that his attempts to discredit her were backfiring, and the support for her was growing stronger. After several parents spoke, it was Miss Jordan's turn. She stepped forward, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "Thank you all for being here today. I am grateful for the support of these wonderful families and the opportunity to teach their children. My classroom is a place where students can feel free to explore their ideas, express their emotions, and learn in a way that resonates with them. She paused, looking at the board members. Education is not solely about test scores. It's about preparing our children for life. Each child is unique, and we owe it to them to foster their individual talents and passions. I believe that by embracing diverse teaching methods, we can create an inclusive environment that nurtures creativity, empathy, and collaboration. The room erupted in applause, and Miss Jordan felt tears prick at her eyes. She had fought so hard for her students, and now she felt their support surrounding her like a warm embrace. After the speeches concluded, the board chairwoman called for a vote. Miss Jordan's heart pounded as the members deliberated, the tension palpable in the air. Finally, the chairwoman turned to the room. After careful consideration and weighing the testimonies we've heard today, we believe that Miss Jordan's approach is indeed valuable. We will be implementing a pilot program that allows for alternative teaching methods, and we will ensure that emotional and social learning is prioritized alongside academics. A cheer erupted in the room, and Miss Jordan felt her heart soar. She had won not only for herself, but for every child in her care. Principal Thompson's expression was a mix of disbelief and anger, and for the first time, she felt victorious. As the meeting adjourned, parents swarmed around Miss Jordan, congratulating her and expressing their gratitude. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that she had made a difference. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave the school, she found Mr. Walker waiting for her outside her classroom. "Congratulations, Miss Jordan. You did it." "Thank you," she replied, still buzzing with adrenaline. "I couldn't have done it without the support of the parents and my students." He smiled, his eyes reflecting pride. "This is just the beginning. Your voice matters, and the future of education will benefit from passionate teachers like you." As she walked to her car, Miss Jordan felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. She had fought for her students and their right to an education that embraced their individuality. With a heart full of hope, she realized that her work was far from over. There were still many battles to fight, and she was ready to lead the charge, knowing that change was possible when people stood together in support of what truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. I put a lot of love and care into telling these important stories, and your support means the world to me. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Have a blessed day.